Welcome to Virtual Agronomy Course 101. This is session 6. It's titled Putting the Session into Practice. Thank you for joining us today in this session. If you are participating for the first time, welcome to the course. I recommend you check the previous sessions on our webpage. This is 6. There's been 1 through 5. You can find them on our page at fluorosat.com. And for those of you that join us every Thursday, it's great to see you again. And thank you for joining us today. Some housekeeping to go over. This session will be recorded as usual. You will have a link to the recording shortly afterwards. Your microphone are muted, but please do message us throughout the webinar with your questions using the Q&A button. This session will have multiple opportunities throughout where Q&A will be opened up. So please, if you have any question, send it as I'm discussing those different topics. I'm going to pause throughout the webinar and we're going to take more questions. At the end of the webinar, you're going to see a survey. If you have not filled it out already, that would be a great time to do so. Once the window closes, there's no other opportunity to do the survey. So we would highly appreciate if you do it today. Don't forget to share and tag and tweet us at Fluorosat #VirtualAg101. Today is the last session in the course, that's said, but I want to start by thanking all of you for the feedback and your support over the course 5 weeks. This course has been shaped into what it is right now based on the inputs of the viewers, the participants, the guests that we had on, and the fact that we wanted to create a content that includes theory, practice, success stories, and relevant experiences. So your feedback actually encouraged us to continue putting together educational webinars. So today is not the end by any means. We will be hosting a webinar once a month, bringing you industry leaders and discussing crop-specific topics. It will be the next level from 101 agronomy. We all graduated from 101. We've covered the basic tools. We've talked about the different aspects of enabling virtual agronomy. So we're gonna go one level up to talk more details about advanced application and crop-specific topics. I'll talk a little bit later about what's next towards the end of the webinar. But I just wanted to let you know that today is not the end by any means. The title of today's session is Putting Lessons into Practice. And today I consider this session as a dialogue between myself and the course participants. You know, we are and we want to cover all of the virtual agronomy questions and topics that we received, because there was a big bunch of our participants that was watching the YouTubes and they would email us questions. So today's session is me recapping a lot of the things that we've discussed about digital agronomy and virtual agronomy and answering a lot of your questions. I'd like to start by some interesting statistics and polls that we have seen throughout the previous sessions. Then I'm gonna go over the digital tools and how they come into play throughout the growing season. And I've aggregated a few questions we've received from agronomical topics and practice. So we will answer those throughout the webinar. And at the end, I'll tell you more about what's next. So let's start by digging a little bit deeper and almost reflecting, putting this slide was almost reflecting on how this all started. Looking back to mid-April, about 7 weeks ago, we at Fluorosat, we were wondering what we could do to engage with the community of agronomists that are under different levels of lockdown throughout the world. And we came up with this idea. We said, let's create content that has a combination of theory, tools, application, and let's invite and bring in guest speakers that have been in your shoes. They have been in the shoes where they created a digital agronomy service in their organizations. And combining all three, this is what we created, this Virtual Agronomy 101 course. The most rewarding part about all of this was actually bringing together this community of 500 agronomists from 65 countries. These are the statistics of the people and everyone who signed up for this course. 500 signups from 65 countries, connecting every Thursday or watching the recording at a later point. Shout out to all of our European viewers that the timing was really difficult for them, so they would follow up with the YouTube and they would email me saying, can we change the time? So we'll think about all of that. So thank you to both our guests and our participants for making this such a rewarding experience for all of us. We have shared our perceptions, our perspectives, our experiences through multiple polls throughout this webinar. Every webinar had about at least one question or up to 4 in some of them. And we learned that we are in fact not that different, but we also learned a lot from each other. And I think there's a lot to learn because we are diverse. So I selected a few polls that I wanted to highlight in today's recap session. The very first one comes from our nitrogen episode, our nitrogen session. This poll actually represented the differences in our agricultural systems and how we approach nitrogen recommendation. It highlighted how some people approach the profitability, some people approach the yield, and all of that. Another poll that we saw that came out of our scouting session, that actually highlighted how the commonality we have when it comes to scouting. We found out that we are all united in our focus on early detection of crop stress. And generally, we like to get out to the field when possible with the adoption of precision ag. And we want to be out there as soon as possible, sooner or more often than we can. Another poll that came from, I think this was from the last session when we were talking about the challenges and how we can increase adoption. This poll highlighted the challenges of adoption of precision ag, and the majority of the course participants voted and picked the option that said the need of having access to training and continued learning opportunity. So this is a few of the polls that were memorable to me that highlighted our differences and our commonality and how we think about and our practice of precision ag. I guess the biggest takeaway from all of these various polls collectively is that, you know, we as agronomists are not that different. An agronomist in California thinks very similarly to those in South Australia or in Mendoza, Argentina, and those in the Pacific Northwest here in the US are not unlike the ones in Tasmania or Northern France. So we have more in common than different, that's for sure. Just a quick reminder, please send in your questions throughout the seminar because we will have multiple pit stops. So this session is really dedicated to cementing your learnings and making sure that you have all your questions answered before we all graduate from course 101. So please send in your questions. I'll stop and I'll answer them throughout the webinar. Okay. Since we said this is a recap, let's start from the very first beginning. And I'll start the recap of digital tools from how do I get started with virtual agronomy? The question that we got a lot of requests for throughout the whole series. So let me start by, for each of the digital ag platforms, the setup might be a little bit different, but there are 3 main steps to follow. This is pretty much the logic of when you're trying to adopt a digital platform. You need your boundaries, you need your planting date, you need your crop type. And some platforms do not actually ask for crop types. For example, in fluorescence, we do ask you to identify your crop type because we do generate and deliver crop type specific analytics. So this is pretty much the 3 things that you need to get started with digital agronomy and to begin your journey with virtual ag. You either bring in or draw your boundaries, you set your planting dates and estimated harvest date, and you specify your crop type. The fact that when I put those as like the 3 steps, before the session, I just recorded I just wanted to record how I get started on the fluorescence. So I just made this quick video. Let me play it for you to highlight the thinking of the 3 steps, which should be common when you're starting on a digital platform. So you begin by bringing in, creating your farm and field and boundary. This is the step 1. We said this is Farm Valley, the grower is John Smith, and we want to bring in his field. I can either draw it myself or I can upload it. This is the case of I decided to draw the field boundary. So I picked the polygon, clicked on it, and I said done. This is the second click. The third click is I need to set up my crop type. I said I planted on the 28th of May. I'm planning to harvest on the 9th of September, and it is corn. Voila. That's pretty much all you need to get done. As you can see here, as you were able to see a moment ago, it said processing. That means we're done, we have your boundaries, we know what crop you're talking about, when did you plant, when did you harvest. Now let us do our business, let's go and get the imagery and all the other things that you can allow us to get. So this is the first route. The second route that you can take to get started, which is quite unique about fluorescence, is connecting to your existing farm management system. So, and here's the question of why did we do this? Why did fluorescence want it to be unique in this capacity? And why did we spend 40% of our resources to create this link between fluorescence and your farm management system? Many reasons. I'd like to highlight a few. The very first one is because we actually listened to our early customers' feedback. We identify that those customers helped us identify one of the biggest bottlenecks, which is moving field data between systems. And it quickly becomes very time consuming. And what's frustrating about all of it is that you already have all of that data somewhere else. On those farm management systems, let it be ProAgrica, Agrian, or AgWorld, you have your boundaries, you have your field data, you have what crop you're planting, you have when you actually planted and when you expect to harvest. And you have a lot of information. So why replicate all of that effort? Why have to do this job again? And another reason, which is quite related to this, is the fact that there is a wealth of information. There's information about your crop rotation. There's information about yield. There's information about what applications you did that you have captured in these farm management systems. And these information will only make the analytics smarter. Something that I've tried to emphasize throughout the whole webinar is the fact that we need to aggregate multiple sources of data to become worthy of saying we have assisted an agronomist to making a decision. The more we know, the more we see, the more we're able to provide a piece of information that brings value. I do want to highlight that, it's in the hands and it's in the decision of if someone decides to come through the route of I want to click on the integration, that's how I want to get started. It's up to you to decide how much you want to bring from ProAgrica, Agrian, or AgWorld. So just making that clear that that is a decision, that's a choice that you can do. And that way, your time to value is extremely short. If you choose that route, by the time that you click and you link one of those platforms to fluorescence, you will be able to be up and going in about 1 to 2 hours. That means you have all your boundaries, all your crop types, and all of your planting dates. So this should cover how do I get started. We're graduating 101. We're not going to come back to this. The second part. Okay, I am starting. Tell me about the tools and tell me when do I use what. So the digital tools are available and are created to assist you throughout the big crop cycle. What does that mean? Starting by crop performance. You look at crop performance because you want to be able to track emergence. You want to see your crop growth. You want to see at what level, at what layer, at what growth stages is your potato or your corn or your rice. Later on, there's a lot of work. The peak season of crop scouting happens. You start looking into the crop stress reports. These are tools that help you identify where you need to scout, what you need to look at. There's also tools that helps you by doing in-season application of fertilizers such as the nitrogen. So the point here is, what I want you guys to keep in mind is, there's the crop cycle, there's all of those different tools that I'm gonna come and use and count on their intelligence throughout the growing season. And it's not only throughout the growing season, it's a little bit further than the growing season. What I like about that is the enablement and the power of the post-season planning sessions that you and your grower have. You have all the insights that allows you to quickly analyze and discuss what had worked, what did not work, and what do you want to do differently this year. So the tools are made, they're created for you to use throughout your crop cycle. From early on, from planting to planning, from harvest to planning. So throughout the whole process. So speaking of crop performance, I want to thank you for the massive compliment to your efforts and global reach. Well done. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is super helpful, super encouraging. I want to dig deeper into those tools and recap. The plan is as follows. I'm going to recap a little bit about what intelligence a tool should provide for us, and then I'm going to show you an example. I'm going to be switching between this slide and a live example on the platform, just to highlight some case studies and some applications and practice of what does that mean in reality. Great. So I'm starting with what do I need to get going with crop performance? Pretty much nothing other than your basic field statistic, field setup. So you've already brought in your boundary, you've identified your crop type, and we're all good. What happens from here is automatically the retrieval of the weather data, the remote sensing data. The remote sensing could be from a satellite, from a plane, or from a drone. So pretty much there's nothing else you need to do. You've already done all the hard work by the initial setup. What does this report? What does the intelligence that the crop performance brings to me as an agronomist? It reports on multiple things. One of it is crop status, and crop growth status. So what does that mean? Crop growth status or crop growth stage is a column. I'm going to show you in a minute. It's a column that identifies what stage is your crop at. For example, in potatoes, we use the 6 stages of emerged, not emerged, emerge, crop development, row closure, and this is for the cases of crops similar to potato. What this report also, the information it brings as well is your crop growth speed. And for that column, the labels that you would see, it's gonna be a bunch of, it's either has been declining in growth, has it been growing steadily, has it been growing fast? So how is it growing from last week to this week? Because again, think about this as we're looking at imagery. We have a full overview of the field and every other field in your portfolio as an agronomist. So we're able to look at them and say, this one is advancing faster than that one. And in the example that I'm going to show you in a minute, I'm going to highlight this particularly. Now, how is this information delivered to me? 2 ways. You can either access them through the platform, or you can receive them through an email that reaches your inbox that summarizes the crop performance information. So let's go look at a live example. I'm going to be bringing in this potato example that I like. Okay, so this is the case where I am an agronomist, and that's an easy job agronomist if I only have to monitor 5 pivots. But I'm an agronomist and I'm looking at those 5 pivots. It's my grower. I want to provide the best services and I want to be in the right place at the right time. How do I use the crop performance analytics? I look at it, I'm like, okay, I know that I'm planting potatoes and I need to decide, I need to have an overview. I need to get intelligence of how my potatoes are doing. Right here, you see that this is the crop performance summary. I'm just gonna enable the full dashboard to have a full view. This is the case where my potatoes are put into different varieties, are combined into different varieties. This is here, I'm looking at the clear water russet. Here I'm looking at Shepedy. In the Clearwater russet, I have different pivots that are planted this variety. In Shepedy, I have pivot 1 and 3. I can see here that those were planted, the Shepedys were planted a couple weeks before the Clearwater. And I'm looking now on the 2nd of June. So 2nd of June, what do I get out of it? I'm looking and I'm seeing all my crops are in the stage of crop performance, of crop development. Looking at it in May, so I planted in April and I planted some in March. Come May, I look at this dashboard, and as the agronomist, I reach this conclusion. I can say all my Clearwater russets have not emerged yet. Their crop growth is stable. So relative to each other, they're all growing at the same speed. They're all moving in the same direction. And based on the NDVI score, the worst NDVI scorer between all of them is pivot 5. So come May the 22nd, I'm looking at pivot 5 and I'm thinking, I need to keep a closer eye at pivot 5. I want to see if pivot 5 is going to catch up or not. It's a different case in my Shepedy. Pivot 1 and pivot 3 are more advanced. They are in the crop development stage. They're both identified as fast growth. So from last week to this week, they've grown really, really fast. And it looks like they're quite comparable, but pivot 3 has a lower biomass index or a score compared to pivot 1. Let's fast forward and go a little bit to July. So now it's July. I come here and I say, okay, I'm looking at my russets. They're all at the same stage. They're all in closed canopy. Pivot 4 is still behind. It's still the one that has the smallest, this is consistent throughout the season. It's still the one with the smallest NDVI. And when it comes to my Shepedy, it looks like pivot 3 have advanced to senescing a little bit faster than pivot 1. So from a logistic perspective, I know that pivot 3 is going to go to harvest a little bit earlier than pivot 1. So this is an example of how crop performance is something that you could use to derive intelligence. I don't want to waste, I don't want to spend more time on it. I do have a few questions. Your source of base map. So I have one question live and I have one question that I got through email from one of our participants. So I'll start with the quick emailed question. It says, what aspects of crop performance have you been able to monitor remotely? The biomass, the vigor, the canopy, the water stress? And the answer is as follows. It's pretty much all of the above. And something that I've emphasized throughout the webinar was helping everybody look at analytics and understand that there is data that enables an analytics. There's a data that enable a piece of information. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So in the case of a water stress, if you want to derive any water stress information, it is data dependent. For example, you need a thermal sensor to advise on a water stress condition. You need a sensor that has red edge band to advise on identifying really subtle changes between chlorophyll content and early stresses of nitrogen or any early stresses, any stress that is chlorotic that will show as symptoms having chlorosis or yellowness. That would be something you need you need a source of data that can see in the red edge band. So as a debrief, it's all of the above, but they're all data dependent. Another question we got live was, what's your source of base map as you use them in point number 1, and how you define the boundaries of the first step in your approach? How does one access and use that source? How use them in point number 1. Okay, so I think you're asking about the boundaries. So the way that we define a boundary is pretty much the border of your field. So for example, if you have a pivot, then what you would do on the platform is you will use the draw a circle, and then you're gonna trace the border of your field, and that's how you create your boundary. A couple things about creating good boundaries is the following. First of all, you need to make sure that you're not, like, for example, if you have a case of an orchard where a house or the ranch is in the middle of it or on the side of it, you want to be able to trace only the planted part, the orchard itself, and carve out anything that is the house, the car, the barn, whatever it is. And the idea here is to make sure that you're only capturing, you're not averaging, your NDVI. I mean, think about it. If you have your house included and we're trying to average all the NDVI score for that field and all the houses giving you zeros, that's gonna differ, that's gonna weigh in and influence. It's just noise. I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know. Perfect. Moving on to the second tool, it's called the crop stress that we've talked about previously as well. Same thing as crop performance. There's actually no setup needed. It's just the same field setup. What does it report on? It reports on, it detects and it locates the areas in your field that are showing signs of crop stress. It identifies the size of those areas. It shows you how they're evolving over time. And then you're going to be able to identify, has it been growing? Is the problem growing? Is the problem being resolved? If I actually did a management practice and I made a decision, I took an action, did it affect it? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? So these are the information, these are the stress metrics that crop performance, that crop stress reports on. How is it delivered? It's also delivered to you. You can either see it on the platform or you can get it on as an email sent to you. Let's go have a quick example on some cases of crop performance. Okay, I pulled up those two examples from the platform. The very first example is when we are identifying stress, irrigation stress. So it's a kind of stress that we identify when we analyze an image. And then we say, okay, water is not being sprayed uniformly. Those particular crops are, those corn, in this case, it's a corn pivot. Those corn temperature is much higher than everywhere else. So they're not being irrigated uniformly and as well as everywhere else in your field. So what the crop stress does at this point, it identifies, as you can see here, those rings. So these are pivots, these are nozzles that we are suspecting they're not spraying uniformly. So you have here a list of all of those nozzles. If you click on one of them, you'll be able to go and see, okay, how do I get there? It's 470 feet from the center. My scouting team, I'll forward the email. They receive the email already. They look at it and they plan, okay, Monday morning, tomorrow morning, I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna go check and turn those nozzles on and confirm and double check if they're spraying, if they have any issue or if they're just like really old and need replacement, which is very common in nozzles. Another example of crop stress is this example over corn. This is the case where looking at the imagery coming from Sentinel, we were able to identify that this corn looks like this area, upper northern part of the field is quite stressed. And as you can see here, it comes with no label because it's you, the agronomist, that's gonna click on it and say, okay, I've looked at it, I've identified what it is, I'm going to label it. This is the case of a green snap. So you can either edit it or attach a label of it's a disease, it's an insect, or it's a wind effect or any of that. What's pretty cool as well is the fact that you can look up the detection history. So that tells you that this problem, although it's September 15, but we've seen this problem on September 5. So on September 5, it was the first time we saw it, and it was a 17-acre problem. 10 days later, it's still a 17 area problem. So it's identified as high because it's increasing in size and it's increasing in severity. So if the score of this was 0.4 on the 5th of September, it's scoring worse on the 15th of September, i.e. it needs your attention. So this is an example of how the crop stress is useful. It can either identify an irrigation stress or any stress that's seen in the field, insect, weeds. It's not diagnostic. It doesn't tell you what specifically it is, but it does highlight, it does tell you where to go and how to go and scout it and look at it early on. If you want to learn more about the crop stress, refer back to, I think session 3 is when we talked about it in details with our guest, John, because John and his team do a lot of scouting. So I would recommend you refresh on that. A question we got through email was, how does an agronomist use crop stress tool to decide when and where to scout? how does an agronomist use crop stress tools to decide when and where to scout? Yes. This question is absolutely something that I hear about, and I hear it from a lot of our customers and a lot of early adopters. I like to make the disclaimer that what these tools bring, the information that we're bringing, is facts from the fields. We're telling you, we're looking at the field, we analyzed it, and we saw areas that have issues, that have problems. We tell you how big the problem is. We tell you how, not me, the report tells you how it's spreading over time. So these are all information from the field, bringing you the news. And depending on how risk averse you or your grower is going to dictate how many of these areas you want to scout. And I remember that the conversation with our guest, John Gibson, on session 3, that he pretty much talked a lot about how he makes the decision of what needs to be, which one of these scouts, which one of these alerts of these areas I'm gonna go out there and look for. So it's a combination. It's a combination based on economical threshold, based on the logic of, are you prone, is your mission to be preventative? We all want to be preventative. So I think that applies to all of us. But there comes a lot of play of the economics and the time and the capacity and the size and the crop and the value and all of the above. So this tool brings the facts to your inbox, and it's you, the agronomist, the decision maker, to decide when you want to go and which one of those areas you want to go out and scout. Another question about scouting through the live questions. It says, thermal imagery require drone or aircraft, which is true, which is not usually available. That's debatable. Is there alternative ways? It's not that it's not available. There's a lot of actually sensors that provide very decent thermal imagery that are reliable to do analytics with. One of our partners have the MicaSense company. They make sensors that we always analyze. It's troublesome doing drones, but I don't think that should deter anyone from using them. One way to go about it is, if you really don't have the knowledge and don't have the capacity, there's a lot of service providers, and they're spread across all of the agricultural areas that are equipped with capable drones, that are equipped with capable sensors that you can hire to capture data for you. So back in the days, 3 years ago, everyone thought that I need to have my own drone and my own sensor. It was a big investment. The whole process is not only drone and sensor. You need the drone, you need the sensor, then you need the software to stitch it, then you need the intelligence and the knowledge to put it all together. Hence, I would highly recommend you reaching out to a local service provider who does that for a business and try to get from them thermal imagery if possible. Yeah, that's true. That's true. In some countries, there are regulation limitations to drones and aircraft. Which is a reality. I know, for example, the FAA are talking about beyond line of sight. I know it's a different case in Australia and across the world. So if you are in an area where there is limitations, yeah, you might want to, maybe what you would do is you want to think about localized thermal sensors, which is a thermal sensor that you can mount on top of this. I see this very common in vineyards. They mount a sensor that has a footprint that covers a couple vineyards, and then costly and scalable. I know. Hey, thermal doesn't come cheap. Okay. I'm glad you stopped me there. I was going to talk more about that sensor because I like them. I worked on them in my PhD time. Okay, awesome. Let's move on and talk about crop nutrition. So crop nutrition is also one of the most common tools. Special about that one is the fact that it's the in-season tool of coming up with a nitrogen recommendation. Unlike the previous two apps, nitrogen currently requires a few more inputs. So as you can see here, it's not only plain and weather, it's a combination of some more inputs of related to soil type, soil depth, planting density, nitrogen at planting, how much you added previously. So these are the information that are needed to initiate and to come up with the recommendation. Session 4 was all about crop nutrition. If you guys want to hear more details, I encourage you to go and look up more on session 4. It's pretty much, the whole app is based on an agricultural crop modeling algorithm called EPSIM that simulates your crop. That means it creates its digital twin to estimate its potential and current weather condition and its potential of what will it need, when, how much nitrogen it's going to need, and how much is the spread of nitrogen that needs to happen in the field, where, which zones need to get what. And it also enables you to interact with that recommendation. So with the nitrogen recommendation, you're able to adjust for the season outlook. You're able to adjust for the economical parameters. For example, you can choose different options of fertilizers, input the pricing, and then think, okay, it looks like urea at that price makes more sense if I want to add UAN 32 at that price. So it gives you that flexibility, that adjustment between the price of the fertilizer, the price of the commodity, if there's any restrictions, volume restrictions that you have on doing any application. And the latest addition, addition to the nitrogen recommendation that we recently released to our US customers is the capability to set your own goals as well, to set your yield goals. So let's go look at it in action. I'm gonna pull up here an example. This is an example field where we are trying to come up with a recommendation for this specific crop. As you can see here in the crop and parameters, you will see there's multiple parameters that you can come here and put: planting density, soil depth, and row spacing. And what it does is that it pretty much, you have the capability now to run nitrogen recommendation on it. Let me just click here. You go to zone management, and you enable the toggle that says nitrogen recommendation. Just zoom in, and what do I get? I get the variability, I get my zones spread and labeled from best performing from the yield data, from analyzing the imagery over multiple years for that specific field. I spread my zones from those that has the big potential to those that have the least potential. And then I come here and I can edit my recommendation. For example, I can pick, if I want to use urea, that's the price of the urea currently in the US. That's the price of that commodity, spring wheat, that we're using. If there's any restriction on the fertilizer, you can do that as well. You can add it. The season outlook, let's say that it's more of a little bit over neutral, it's not totally wet. Let's say that I am in a position where my attitude towards risk is high risk and I want to maximize my profit. And let's say I want to set up my yield goals after the common practices, after emergence. The agronomist and the grower go visit those fields, and then they're like, okay, emergence is looking great. This is looking like a field that we can push. So I'm going to come here and say, it's looking like we can go anywhere from 50 to 120 bushel per acre. And then you can update the recommendation. And what it does is that it generates new recommendations based on my inputs that I just showed you, of how much pounds of urea I need to put in each of those zones. And you can also, in this case, export it to KML. You can open that and have those different zones with the different nitrogen recommendation. This is in brief. Again, this was the latest addition that we added to the US this growing season, which is the capability to add the yield monitoring, which I am personally very excited about. Okay, so how is it delivered? It's delivered real time. Oops, let me go back 1 second. It's real-time recommendation. So if you want to do a nitrogen addition on, for example, in this case, this is the result on the 28th of April. What you have to do, you have to go, you have to pick the date. and then you generate the recommendation. 2 questions were common that came from that came in after our nitrogen session. One of them was, how does an agronomist use the nitrogen tool? And then how do you make sure it's relevant to your local soil type? I'll answer the first one briefly. The workflow is as follows. You need to log into the platform. You set up the parameters like I showed you, and then you're able to generate a shapefile that has a nitrogen prescription per zone. This is updated daily. So you go to the date. For example, I know that tomorrow morning I'm going to spray my fields. I wake up early. I click on the date and I generate a map. Tomorrow, the following day, it's going to be another recommendation. So it's generated every day for you. Okay, that's pretty much what I want to answer that question. And how do you make sure it's relevant to the local soil type? I got a lot of questions after the nitrogen episode session talking about the soil type. The good news is we've actually deployed the soil type lookalike in Australia this year. What does that mean? So it's basically what it means is that the model, the APSIM model, fetches the soil type based on the government supplied soil maps. And then you can either leave it at that or provide your agronomical knowledge and set those soil types yourself. If you have actually done soil sampling and you have a different result, you can update it. But the base is pretty much automated. We automatically go and we fetch the government supplied soil maps. For our US customers, this is something that we will be talking about very shortly. We have a pretty big announcement coming about the nitrogen and fetching soil data. So just stay tuned. I'm not allowed to share yet, but we'll let you know very soon about the advancement that's coming about soil types for the US customers. Okay, more tools to talk about. This is one of my favorite because of all the enablement and the insight that it brings for the end of season discussions. So these are reports that you're able to generate. These are insights that you're able to go to your grower meeting come the fall, sit down and have conversations. What worked, what didn't. I'm just gonna pull up the Q&A to make sure that if I'm missing any question. Can these models, one question about the nitrogen, can these models be applied to horticulture planting? So these models can work for a wide range of crops like corn and cereals, wheat, and others. So they are crop specific. So specify which crop you're interested in, and I can answer that more in more details. So back to the post-season reports. I just wanted to highlight, I don't have a lot of time, but I just want to highlight that it's the tool that comes in play after harvest, the moment you start planning for next year. It's very powerful. It gives you an overview, which varieties performed well, which varieties I need to think of an alternative, which field in general was really lagging behind throughout the whole growing season. Maybe that's an amendment, a soil amendment that I need to do early on. I like those reports. I like the conversations they stir, and I like the agronomist enablement to come at the end of it and say, okay, next year we're gonna do things better, because we have numbers and figures that tells us what we did that worked and what we did that didn't work. One more thing I want to highlight is a very fundamental piece of all these tools. Okay, they work, they make sense, they bring information, they're all enablement to the agronomist. The question is, how do I drive adoption? And I want to refer you here to the last session we had, session 5, when we hosted, when we had on board Connor from Valley Ag. Connor spoke to length about the strategies to create a digital ag program in an organization. And to recap, he highlighted 3 things. He said, those will help you drive adoption. The very first thing he highlighted was education. Educate your team members, educate your growers about the benefits of these tools. The second thing is to find an early adopter, find a partner, find a champion. Identify an early adopter that you can pilot those tools with and create local success story. And the last thing he highlighted, he mentioned that what would be great is you building local case studies, build ROI, do the calculation, spread the news, tell people about the success and the value that you brought with your partner, early adopter client. Again, I encourage you, go back. There was a lot of interesting discussions about ROI and how you identify it and how you find those early adopters and what Connor did. So session 5 has a lot of information about adoption and ROIs and such. One more thing before we say we're done. I got a question that says, how do you tailor the input and irrigation based on the differences in the imagery if you don't have a variable rate irrigation fertilizer system? Yes, well, to be able to to use any variable rate application, could be fertilizer or an irrigation or any other, you need to have the machinery, you need to have the equipment to differentiate, to decide I'm going to add 5 tons in location A and I'm going to add 20 in location B. So it's quite fundamental that any kind of adoption to those precision ag comes with the equipment that enables it. I hope that answers your question. Before we're done, I want to recap real quick. Today's session was a recap of all the tools, everything that we've talked about in the past 5 and today's 6th session. It's a summary of how can you do, what can you do with the tools that you're looking at, how they come to practice in reality. So what's next for us? We will be hosting, as I mentioned early, we will be hosting a monthly webinar on the 3rd Thursday of every month. It will be more crop specific, and we really look forward to all of you guys to joining us. I want to highlight that you can also have access to all the recordings on YouTube, the whole 5-6 sessions that passed. As a friendly reminder, those that have chosen to go ahead and sign up for the hands-on experience trials, that time is closing within the next week or so. Our support team is going to reach out to you and to the participants who have been using fluorescence in the previous few weeks to follow up on your experience. Please email us, reach out to us anytime via email. You have my email. I send you the reminder to the webinar. Just reply to that. I'll be able to see your feedback. If you want to give us feedback or discuss any of the topics, or if there's any topics that you want us to bring on the next edition, on the next series of webinars that are coming next. Last chance to continue this, to complete the survey. Please do if you have a minute. We were really very encouraged by the feedback of people saying that they've learned a lot, or they've really learned a lot of new information, and highlighting and choosing the fact that 75 said that they will come back for more if we put together more webinars, and 20% said maybe. So that gave us the green light to go ahead and put more stuff together. Next, on June the 18th will be the first episode, the first session in the Virtual Agronomy Expert Series. It will be monthly. We got a lot of requests. There's a lot of topics that we already are planning for. More nitrogen, more organic farming, a lot of other topics. Actually, the tree management is going to be the very first one we start with, because we did get a lot of questions about trees. So we're going to dedicate our first webinar in the expert series about tree management. We're going to have guest speakers talking about it. We're going to talk about analytics and digital ag and how that helps in tree management. Register now. There's a link in the chat. There's a link to the survey as well. It's going to pop up as soon as we end the webinar, the survey. But please register if you'd like to register now for the session on June 18th. Please do. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Let me see if we have any more questions. Awesome. Thanks to our support team that was helping me with the support with answering the questions, and for everyone at Fluorescence that helped make these webinars happen. So thank you guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you 3 weeks from now, June 18th, we're gonna talk trees.
So that's those are some interesting kind of highlights and.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Just to debrief, see you on June 18th talking about trees. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.